Hello everyone! For a long time I've had to talk about Metropolis on my to-do list, and today is the day to cross it off. Here are my thoughts on this silent classic released in Germany in 1927. In the futuristic city of Metropolis, the idle-rich frolic and carouse while the working-class underground exhaust themselves keeping the machines running. The city builder's son, after an encounter with a young woman from below, ventures down to see how the other half lives. Upon learning that she, Maria, is an advocate for peaceful change, he perceives that he is the mediator her people have been waiting for. But a bitter inventor with his own motives uses Maria to give his machine man life. A fake Maria is sent out to wreak havoc among the already divided people, bringing tensions between rich and poor to a fever pitch. Whenever this movie comes up, my gut reaction is, ugh, I love Metropolis. I must confess that response is a little bit misleading. I do really enjoy the movie. I've eagerly watched it several times, and there are many things I love about it. But there are also things in it that I don't care for, things where I'm like, I'm not sure what they were trying to say here, and things that, no matter how many times I see it, I don't really understand. Metropolis was directed by Fritz Lang, written by his then-wife, screenwriter and novelist Thea von Harbu. In many ways, stylistically, politically, etc., it is a product and reflection of the time and place it was made, and it's a patchwork of literary, artistic, and architectural influences. It was a huge, ambitious project. Its budget ballooned as production stretched to 17 months. It involved a multitude of sets, hundreds of extras, and costly, sometimes dangerous special effects. Though now considered among the greatest films ever made, when it first premiered in 1927, reception was mixed. Audiences marveled at its visuals, but critics complained about its length, 153 minutes, its story, and its oversimplified, preachy message. I can't argue with that. The message couldn't be more obvious. It's stated several times, and in case you missed it, they clobber you with it at the end. After its initial showing, the film was recut, and then an even more truncated version was released, I believe by an American company, for international distribution. For years, this was the version of Metropolis that people saw, and the original premiere version was thought to be lost forever. As time passed, Metropolis grew in popularity, and people started trying to fix it up. One of the most successful attempts was a 1984 restoration by Giorgio Moroder, who cut the film down to 80 minutes, which is almost half its original length, and added a pop music soundtrack to match the futuristic setting. Then, in 2008, a damaged print of Metropolis, longer than other copies, was discovered in Buenos Aires. You might be thinking, how did it get from Germany to Argentina? But it was not brought by a Nazi fleeing the Allies. The film reels were sent to Buenos Aires in 1928 for distribution, then acquired by a film critic who later sold them to a museum. Anytime an old film believed lost is recovered, it's cause for celebration, and this was a particularly special discovery. If you watch the documentary about how they found Metropolis and how they restored Metropolis, it tells a fascinating story of film detective work, studying records, looking for clues in old newspapers, following the tracks of different copies. It's like a cold case file. In 2010, the most complete version of Metropolis we're likely to get, 148 minutes long, which is only 5 minutes shorter than the premiere version, with 25 minutes of restored footage from Argentina and New Zealand, was released. And I can tell you, this was around the time that I was really getting into old films and lurking in the classic film fan community, and people were psyched. And even though I was barely familiar with Metropolis myself, their excitement was infectious, and I couldn't wait to see this movie that everybody was talking about. And when I finally did see it, it did not disappoint. I think it's a beautiful looking film. There's something dazzling about it. Its photography, its faces, its set designs, with the combination of Art Deco and German Expressionism. There are just so many things that look so impressive and amazing, and the movie is 98 years old. One of the cinematographers was Karl Freund, whose credits date all the way back to 1911. Like Fritz Lang, Freund later found success in Hollywood, working as DP on many films and as director on a few others, including Universal's The Mummy and Mad Love. He's also considered the unofficial director of Todd Browning's Dracula. I've reviewed all three of these movies. Now, Metropolis does have a lot going on, and it can be an overwhelming experience. It is long, and it's got a lot of moving parts, even though it is a fairly simple, straightforward story. Maybe there's too much going on, as it requires at least 3 viewings to grasp everything that happens, and even then, there might be some things that make you scratch your head. The way I see it, there are 6 different levels of storytelling here. There may be more than 6, but 6 is what I came up with, and these are not in order of importance. It's just how I wrote them out, how I organized them for this video. Number 1, it's a fairy tale akin to The Prince and the Pauper, where the rich son of the city's founder changes places with a poor worker. While the worker enjoys a night on the town, the prince's naive eyes are opened. With a new, selfless, compassionate perspective, he gets involved in the people's struggle, joins forces with a virtuous maiden, and accomplishes a heroic feat. Number 2 is a prophetic work of science fiction. We have the design of Metropolis, inspired by New York City, with its Art Deco skyscrapers and crisscrossing planes and highways. But there are also these cool, constantly moving elevators. The founder makes a video call to the man at the heart machine, and most prominently, there's the Maschinenmensch, or Machine Man, a robot that transforms into a humanoid. Number 3, it's the inventor's revenge tale. Mourning the loss of the woman he loved, who married his rival and bore him a son, the inventor Rottwang is determined to bring her back to life using Maria's likeness. He'll then use this robotic creation to destroy his rival's work. There's a point where the film veers into Hunchback of Notre Dame territory. Rottwang goes mad and chases Maria around a cathedral. There are gargoyles, and she's hanging from a bell, and every time I see this part I wonder, how did we get here? There are still a few scenes that are missing or incomplete. They've done the best they could with the restoration, but one of the biggest missing pieces is a confrontation, which I suspect provides the build-up for this sequence. Unfortunately, with it gone, it seems like Rottwang, who was wacky to begin with, just suddenly loses his marbles and decides Maria, who was just a tool, is his lost love reincarnate. The revenge storyline is a catalyst, but it's also a subplot, and if I'm being honest, it feels like that cathedral sequence was thrown in just to have a dramatic chase and fight scene. A chase and fight scene that go on for too long, by the way. I always forget how much of the movie remains after a certain point. Number 4, it's a fairly obvious political or socioeconomic parable, showing the vast divide between the rich, who play all day and night, and the poor, who work all day and night. Suffering and oppression lead to rebellion, which can only be stopped if the leaders of the two sides find a way to meet in the middle. Number 5, it's a biblical allegory. Metropolis is full of biblical allusions, especially from the Book of Revelation, especially the Whore of Babylon. There are also religious allusions. The 7 deadly sins come up. That's a Catholic teaching, not in the Bible. The story of the Tower of Babel from Genesis 11 is incorporated, although Lang and von Harbu reimagine it as a fable of class warfare, master and slaves unwilling and unable to communicate, leading to rebellion and destruction, which foreshadows Metropolis's fate. They completely removed God from the picture and therefore changed the point of the story. There's also heavily implied symbolism. Maria cries out for a mediator, someone who can intercede on the suffering workers' behalf and deliver them. It is Freder Fredersen, the son of the city's creator, who will assume that role. He's the one they've been waiting for. The mediator, the intercessor, the savior, the Messiah. And if he's supposed to be a messiah, then Maria, in her rustic chapel cave backed by crosses, is role-playing John the Baptist. Normally I don't make a big deal out of stuff like this. Though I am a Christian, I don't look for or focus on apparent biblical symbolism or parallels in secular media. But when it's so intentional and so prominent, you can't overlook it. It's not lost on me, however, that while there are all these religious references, there is no mention of God or Jesus Christ. They don't figure into the story or dialogue at all. One could argue that they've actually been cut out, and certain allusions and imagery have been appropriated by the filmmakers for their own purposes. Number 6, it's a morality tale. The rich give themselves over to their own pleasure, pride, greed, and lust leading them to destruction. It's a condemnation of the embrace of a completely hedonistic lifestyle. That may make it sound like the film favors the poor over the wealthy, but the light in which the workers are portrayed isn't 100% positive. This downtrodden lower class is fickle, their emotions and their loyalties changing on a dime. A figure they cheer and idolize and follow into battle one second, they're clamoring to murder the next. It's one of several ways in which the film references the French Revolution, in which the bloodthirsty leaders were themselves guillotined at the end of it. It's another strike against them that not one of these people questions this frenzied, altered Maria. No one says, hold on, wait a minute, you've always preached peace and love and told us to wait for a mediator to do our fighting for us. What happened? Why's the message changed? And how come you're acting so weird? The third strike is that these men and women go rushing off to destroy the heart machine, which affects the city above, but also the city below in which they live, and they completely forget they've left all their children behind. As a side note, after doing some reading on Fritz Lang and Thea von Harbu, two individuals who I find I like less the more I learn about them, the more I learn about their personal lives, I should say, I do find the preachiness and the moral messaging and the biblical references a bit more off-putting. I won't go into sordid details about their personal lives. You can read about that yourself if you want to. And I don't want to make claims about their politics when there are different claims out there. There's discrepancy about what their views truly were, as you would expect from German people living in that time, who survived that time. But I just want to say, I'm aware of these things, and in my research, learning more about the people, I did also become aware of some contradiction, hypocrisy between the heavy-handed messages and the reality. Does it hurt my enjoyment of the film? No, not really. I mean, I've always found the heavy-handed messaging a bit much, but I enjoy the movie anyway. Editing Weiselberry jumping in with a 7th layer, it's bothered me that I didn't include this. It's also a love story. It's rich boy meets poor girl. And it's also reminiscent of Swan Lake. Maria and the robot, often referred to as Futura, are akin to pure Odette and sensual Odile. And Freder, thank goodness, is a less confused Prince Siegfried. While a fight for love isn't the point here, it is a component. Freder is drawn into the whole adventure by Maria's visit above ground, and he twice, or 3 times, rushes to her rescue. It's not a deep love story, and it's fast-tracked, but it's convincing enough. Let's talk about the cast. Gustav Fröhlich stars as Freder Fredersen. Thea von Harbu discovered him, and this movie made him a star in Germany. At first, he seems a little old to me. Maybe it's the makeup or the outfit, but in this scene where he's distressed over what he witnessed below, clinging to his father and then clutching at the foreman, I always think he's too old to be behaving this way. But then again, he seems younger later on, and that's funny because as the character grows wiser, you'd expect him to look older, but instead it's like his face is reflecting youthful optimism. As cliché or sappy as it may seem to some, I do like the story of the privileged young man who ventures down, is overwhelmed with horror and then empathy for his fellow human beings, and goes out of his way to make something out of his frivolous existence. At first a self-indulgent man-child, Frater wakes up, steps up, and proves himself a hero multiple times over. And I think Gustav Fröhlich does a fine job portraying this character and this journey, making Frater Fraterson a likable, compelling protagonist. Alfred Abel plays his father, Jo Fredersen, and I've always really liked his performance. He's got such a serious expression, but though he's stern, he's not without a certain gentleness, which I find appealing. I also find his eyes very striking, conveying an eternally troubled sadness. As the story progresses, Abel presents a picture of a man who is complicated. He's not necessarily good. In some regards, he is one of the villains of the piece, but he's not completely bad either. And he finds himself in a crisis when he's torn between love of his work and love of his son, and confronting the fact that it's his decisions that have led to disaster. But the true face of Metropolis is Brigitte Helm. She plays the real Maria, the machine man, and the fake Maria. As flesh and blood Maria, she's a warm-hearted, wide-eyed saint, channeling purity through simplicity. As the imposter, she's got crazy, twitching eyes and a tendency to grin, and she wears her clothes in a more disheveled, wanton fashion, when she's wearing clothes at all. What's impressive about Helm is how she moves. As Maria, Helm does some flailing around. She bends almost completely backwards in one scene where Rotvang grabs her. But as the fake, she's got these herky-jerky movements, which I think hint at her mechanical origins. And then there's her unique style of dancing, debuted in the bizarre not safe for kids scene at the Yoshiwara nightclub. It is the most awkward scene in the movie, thanks to the outfit, the dancing, and the comical depiction of lust. It is pretty absurd. You got the eyeballs all over the screen, and then the men who are just like... Every time this scene comes up, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. There is another scene earlier on in the movie, in the Eternal Gardens, I think that's what they're called, that has some thinly veiled nudity, I'll say. And I would say that's not really safe for kids either, but it's nothing to this scene. Wow. It should also be mentioned that while the production was grueling for just about everyone involved, Lang ordering his actors to do multiple takes of scenes that were often exhausting and sometimes painful, and keeping 500 kids in cold water for 2 whole weeks while they shot the flood sequence, it was probably hardest for Helm. She had multiple roles and demanding scenes to play. The machine and mensch costume was custom fit and made from a flexible material, but it was still stiff, hot, and hard to move in. She got dragged by her hair in one scene, she almost suffocated in the transformation scene, and in a later sequence, her dress caught fire. It's a wonder she survived the making of this movie. And then she basically disappeared from motion pictures. Editing Weiselberry here to make a correction. She did not disappear from motion pictures after this. She was thrust into stardom, starring in 30 additional films and even making a successful transition into the sound era. But she didn't have a serious interest in acting. It was her mother who sent her photo to Thea von Harbu, leading to an audition and her casting at just 17 in Metropolis. She didn't like working for Fritz Lang, and she resented that the film led to her being typecast as a vamp, something she tried and failed to resist. Fed up with movies and with Hitler, in 1935 she quit acting, married a Jewish industrialist, left Germany, and settled down to raise a family, as was her stated preference. And for the rest of her life, she refused to speak about her acting career, turning away any interviewer who tried to bother her. And I respect that. The actor playing the inventor, whose name I have pronounced differently every time I've said it, I think, Rotvang, is Rudolf Kleinroge, who appeared in several other Lang films, including starring as Dr. Mabusa twice. He was also von Harbu's ex-husband, who she left for Lang. I would find that an incredibly uncomfortable situation, but apparently they were all able to work together. And I have a special fondness for the Thin Man, the spooky guy with the funny hat who's dispatched by Fredersen to spy on his son. He's played with relish by Fritz Rasp, whose uniquely sinister mug earned him a lengthy career as a villain. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is actually my favorite thing about Metropolis, its music, which I loved so much when I first saw the film years ago that I asked for the soundtrack for Christmas. Over the years, there have been other scores written to accompany the film, along with that pop soundtrack of the 1984 Giorgio Moroder restoration. But in my opinion, the only proper way to watch Metropolis is with its original orchestral score, written by Gottfried Huberts. I always think it feels silly to call this a silent movie. While it is not a talking picture, it is anything but silent. This score is loud. Huberts composed the score to go with the film exactly. Inspired by Wagnerian opera, he incorporated leitmotifs, which are musical themes that represent individual characters and concepts. This has become commonplace in film scores nowadays, but it was unusual at the time. Just like you wouldn't watch Star Wars without John Williams, or Vertigo without Bernard Herrmann, I can't imagine watching Metropolis without Gottfried Huberts' soundtrack. And yet it wasn't even recorded until 2001. Up to then, the only people who had ever watched the film with the score played in its entirety by a full orchestra as written were those who attended its premiere in 1927, and they heard the music live, which must have been incredible. If I had a time machine, and I could only go to one place in time, that's not where I would go, but if I had a time machine and I could visit 200 different moments in time, that would be one of my 200, maybe. Besides his own themes, Huberts incorporated nods to La Marseillaise, the French national anthem, as the theme of the rebellion with a discordant twist, and the Dies Irae whenever the apocalypse or death is mentioned. And that's something I never picked up on until this most recent viewing. I have to credit a YouTube video for that. There was a YouTube video I watched a couple years ago that was showing all the different films and places where that musical theme was quoted, and I'd never been aware of it before, but I've noticed it ever since. But by far, my favorite part of the score is the main theme for Metropolis, the city itself, which is the first music you hear. It's grand, majestic, powerful, but it's also uplifting and moving. Every time I hear it, I get excited, and then I get a little teary-eyed sometimes. It's just, it has that effect on me. There are certain pieces of music that hit you a certain way, and this is one of them for me. There are things in Metropolis I'm critical of, but I'll always contend it's a masterpiece. It has its oddities, it has a few flaws, it has a couple parts I would just as soon skip, But it also has so many aspects I find alluring and thought provoking. Every time I watch it, I marvel at the achievement, the visuals, the imagination on display. I find it a fascinating and enduring work of art. And those are my thoughts on Metropolis. I hope you enjoyed the video. I would love to hear what you think of this movie if you've seen it, so go ahead and share your thoughts down below, and I'll be back again next week. Thanks for watching.